Hello and welcome to the boxing recap of this weekend. With a very stacked weekend, from Devin Haney to Deontay Wilder, we had many decent fights to watch. Let's start with the main event, Deontay Wilder against Robert Helenius. And what a comeback this was for Wilder. In the first round, he knocked out Robert Helenius with one punch again. In his last two fights, Deontay Wilder was knocked out by Tyson Fury, and Robert Helenius was coming off two knockout victories over Karnacki. Nothing really spectacular happened in the beginning, and Wilder was instantly on his bike, moving around, trying to get different looks, and Robert Helenius was following him to his disadvantage because he never followed a puncher around. They didn't exchange many punches. It was 5-3 punches. Robert Helenius landed 5 and Deontay Wilder 3, but this didn't change anything. At the end of the first round, Robert Helenius walked in. He felt excited that Wilder was finally in the corner, and then but misses with his punches, was open and walking straight into a right hand by Wilder. And this is all it took, just one little right hand, and it wasn't even full extension. Helenius was coming in and Wilder was just throwing a short right hand, and that is all it took. It didn't even look to be a very strong right hand, but it shows you how strong this guy is. With one right hand, I think we have to say that Wilder is one of the hardest punchers ever. I mean, Helenius probably underestimated Wilder there. Didn't think he could throw such a punch out of this position. Wilder is good at this tactic, sometimes falling back to the ropes or falling back in general and then coming off the ropes with a big right hand. I think it was a good tactic by Wilder to move around and let the opponent come to him. Because of his technical deficiencies, this is the best suited strategy for him, in my opinion. He also could jab a bit off his back foot. What Wilder does very good is when he's on the back foot, he can hide his right hand. In contrast, when he's moving forward, you always see his right hand because he cocks his arm back before he throws his right hand. At the end of the day, only a half-extended right hand is all it took for Helenius to look up to the stars. Just one right hand, it was all over. He's obviously up there with the all-time greatest punchers, in my opinion. Nobody throws a stronger and more explosive right hand than Wilder. I mean, what heavyweight can knock anyone out with just one right hand? Even the likes of Ernie Shavers often need multiple shots to finish off an opponent when he's hurt. Can't think of any boxer that is as devastating with his right hand as Wilder. Maybe Julian Jackson, who was also a great puncher at the middleweight division. After all, this was a good comeback fight for Wilder. It was an easy fight and also a credible opponent for his first comeback fight. It would be interesting to see who he fights next and how. I think he probably will fight Andy Ruiz next, and this style matchup favors Wilder in my opinion. Andy Ruiz has very slow feet, but if Ruiz can come inside, he might punish Wilder, but I think at long range he will get caught against Wilder. Wilder's now 36 and at the end of his career, so it's good to see that he's finally calling out Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk. Hopefully we get to see those fights. The current weight of 214 pounds is also better suited for Wilder. He was much lighter than in his fights against Tyson Fury, and we saw him much faster. This would suit him more to move around for long stretches of the fight, like using the tactic of moving around and letting the other guy come to him. Should be used in his next fights. The lighter weight also will give him more stamina. I think this is the perfect weight for him, and he should move up again and put on unnecessary muscle. Another fight we saw was Devin Haney against George Kambosos in Sydney, Australia. This is the rematch. Again, Devin Haney beat George Kambosos to retain his undisputed light world heavyweight titles. The first one was really a boring fight, and so I wasn't really excited for this one. And Devin Haney was very dominant in the last fight and didn't even need to get out of second gear to beat Camposis. A jab and moving around and a good defense was all it took to beat Camposis for Hayne. In the second fight it was a bit more active and the fight was a bit more exciting than last time. Kamposis had some adjustments to make, and we saw that earlier. He tried to become unpredictable by shifting around when he comes in. He tried to be unpredictable by sometimes switching to the southpaw stance, and he tried to be elusive, but he soon fell into a very predictable pattern, ironically. I think Camposis did well to win the first 2 rounds. Hayne soon picked up on this new pattern of Camposis and managed to get in some right hands. I'd say after the 3rd round, Devin Haney really established his rhythm and timed Camposis with his jab and his right hand. And this again was all it took to beat Camposis for Haney. A lot of the time when Camposis would switch to southpaw, Haney would connect with a right hand. The amount of lead right hands he landed on Camposis was unreal. There was a sequence where Camposis was really getting hurt and Haney managed to get 3 lead right hands in against him, but could not stop him or get him down. Again, a very dominant performance, but it's a bit of an eyebrow raiser that he couldn't stop Camposis in this fight, not even with the accumulation of his punches. And it's not like we haven't seen Camposis on the floor before. Camposis was, I think, hurt in the 10th round against Teofimo Lopez. He still came back, but he was on the floor, and against Devin Haney he did manage to put him down or even get a technical stoppage. Devin Haney has a bright future ahead of him, but it is a question to ask if this lack of punching power and maybe even his chin can be a problem against the likes of Lomachenko or Gervonta Davis that he will definitely fight in the future. I suspect it will be maybe a deciding factor when he fights someone of this caliber. He's a phenomenal technician, but this might not be enough to beat someone like Lomachenko. This inability to knock his opponents down will cost him against the very best, in my opinion. Next up we have the first all-female event. Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall turned out to be very interesting and high-paced for a female fight. Claressa Shields really outclassed Savannah Marshall. She was much faster and countered Marshall at every opportunity. Shields came out very fast. For the first 4 rounds it was very impressive. Shields isn't normally a fast starter, but she really came out to prove a point in this one. Savannah Marshall was the bigger and stronger of the two, but she didn't manage to connect with anything significant. Savannah Marshall's awkwardness, slipping and dipping style didn't work out that well against Claressa Shields, who countered her very well, and for every 1 shot that Marshall would land, Claressa Shields would came back with 3 to 4 solid shots, way more accurate than Savannah Marshall. Shields, for my money, dominated most of the fight, but it was clear that the crowd and many officials wanted Savannah Marshall to win. Since Claressa Shields isn't a very popular figure, and since they are in the O2 Arena in London, there was this kind of American against English rivalry. Marshall never really managed to sit down on the punches. She was jumping around too much and never really collecting herself to put out some good power shots. She tried to shift and jump a lot around her, which I think was often not the best idea. But when she got in a good shot, Shields came back and threw 4 fast, accurate shots at her. Claressa Shields showed a very good counter ability and that she could fight at every range. Claressa Shields also showed a good defense and how to get out of corners without getting touched. Savannah Marshall is actually an unusual addition to female boxing. She can really crack. In the post-fight interview, Shields said that she couldn't see out of her right eye from the 6th to the 10th round. And this was because of the punches from Marshall. And one last thing, I think it's interesting that in the post-fight interview she has this relieved and nervous look. This isn't uncommon. This should remind you that world-class boxers aren't your typical average Joe that you see in the street. They have a much stronger mindset in order to cope with the amount of stress and pressure they have. Think of what goes on in a mind when you have to train for a fight, where you can be humiliated in front of millions of people, get hurt, or even suffer long-time consequences. What makes this bout special is that this kind of transcends into a wider public and not just a niche market that would watch these female fights. And I think they definitely need to do a rematch. Not because it was close. It was a very dominant performance by Shields. But I think they have a very big chance to promote female boxing here if they can put on another good show. I also think the second one could be bigger than the first fight. It was a good fight, and congrats to Claressa Shields. She now advances to 13-0 and is undisputed middleweight champion. Claressa Shields definitely has the right to call herself the GOAT, meaning the greatest woman of all time. The biggest problem female boxing faces isn't the so-called sexism or something else people claim that have no clue, but the biggest problem is that there's no competition. Just look at the division that Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall fought at. It's the middleweight division of female boxing. And here at BoxRec we can see that there are only 21 competitors for the titles in this division. Compare this with the male division, and there are thousands of competitors for the titles. And with a smaller talent pool you get less exciting fights. On the undercard there was some controversy surrounding the Alycia Baumgardner and Mikaela Mayer fight. It wasn't a very particularly interesting fight to me, but I've seen many people online would call this instantly a robbery. I haven't scored the bout, but it's definitely a close fight. And it seems that most of the public perception is that it was a robbery and Mikaela Mayer should have won. I wouldn't agree with that, but I think the reason why a lot of people think this is because of the really piss poor commentary of the Sky team. Comparing it with the other major broadcasting networks, Sky really has the worst commentary. It's maybe even worse than DAZN, I think. The commentary is so one-sided that they would only pick up on one fighter does and ignore the work of the other one. But I had the feeling it could have been a draw, but I can't be too mad that Baumgardner got the decision, because I think she did more work after all. And the commentary team were clearly on the side of Mikaela Mayer, so maybe that swayed a lot of people to think that this was a robbery. It was kind of a strange one to me, because neither one of the two really seemed to care if they win. I mean, not in what they say, but in how they fought. There was no urgency, just a mediocre work. Neither one took the bull by the horn and did anything to certainly win the fight. Now Alycia Baumgardner has 3 of the major super-featherweight titles of women's boxing. I want to just start talking shortly about the circus that was the DAZN Misfits card, aka the YouTube Boxing. I know nobody really cares about the details of this fight, but I think the context is that DAZN is putting these on is very interesting. In general, these YouTube boxing fights are often very entertaining, but what we saw at this event is that the amount of mismatches that they have is absurd. Most of the bouts I've seen were one-sided, where one guy KOs the other in under 3 minutes. There was only one competitive fight on the entire card, Slim vs Taylor. This bout was actually good. Of course they are both novices, but the entertainment is still there, since they are both nearly on the same level. Slim beat Taylor and he's definitely one of the better fighters of this YouTube boxing scene. Also, if you look at the main fight of this card, it's so weird that it's a complete mismatch, and this is their main event. DAZN is kind of struggling to putting on these more competitive fights here on these YouTube boxing cards. I think if DAZN really tries to sustain this YouTube boxing model, they have to find more compelling fights and more competitive fighters. I think it's a kind of a bad look that now DAZN lets these famous novices knock each other out to save the boxing business they have. I believe that they will need more competitive fights like the Logan Paul KSI rivalry to keep their model alive. Since the audience isn't a boxing fan audience, they are fans of their influencers. If DAZN fails to capture this young audience, they will move on and probably forget about it. And then DAZN lost another audience to milk for money. Or maybe this is exactly what this demographic wants to see. Or let's look at this from another angle. Maybe this is exactly the type of fights this demographic wants to see. They don't understand the fine art of boxing. They have never watched boxing before, and they just want to see the knockouts. whatever the case may be, I think Dazn should definitely step up the game in this production if they really wanna make money off this model. Another question that will certainly be asked is this good for boxing? This is always what the hardcore boxing fans would ask. And I think that it's certainly not a bad thing. It brings like more eyes of a young audience to the sport. Some of them might take up boxing because their favorite hero or influencer boxes, so they might as well take up boxing. Or they decide to get interested and watch other fights, so it's definitely good that they will capture a young audience. To say that this kind of circus events would harm the integrity of boxing is stupid in my opinion. There's always been like a market for this kind of weird events, like when Muhammad Ali fought this wrestler from Japan, and there have been countless similar events like these before. I mean, some of these bouts were comic relief, just like this one. Where do you see this? A OnlyFans model fighting a TikTok girl, and one of the girls can't take a punch and fights like a deer in the headlights. It's one of the most hilarious things you will ever see. Look it up. It is Astrid Wet versus Keely. I mean, this is one of the weirdest things we'll ever watch, but it is entertaining after all. Alright, thanks for listening so far. You can watch all my Colorized fights on my second channel, and I wanna thank you for watching. Peace.